Vice President Kamala Harris, other Democrats say the fight is not over after Senate Republicans blocked the election overhaul bill known as the For the People Act in a key test vote. Now keep in mind the vote was about debating the legislation, not even voting on it yet. Here to talk about it is Democratic strategist Ameshia Cross. Welcome back to Start Your Day, Ameshia. We love having you on. We're so angry and triggered by this. We knew what to expect from the GOP. They certainly weren't hiding anything. They were screaming what they were going to do. Democrats, they knew before they even presented it. I want to know the purpose of yesterday, but I also first want you to answer. We just heard from the Vice President, Kamala Harris. Did she do enough? Did the White House do enough? Because you've heard the criticism. They should have used the bully pulpit. They should have gone out more and really tried to get the ball rolling. Would it have mattered?
Honestly, Sharon, I think it would have. Coming off of the 2020 election, we saw how hard and how fervent Republicans went to ensure that we would not have an election again that brought out that many diverse groups, people of color, young people, specifically Black people. And they decided to tilt the scales in their favor, meaning that they were going to push for voter purges. They were going to push for new ID laws. They were going to remove polling places. They were going to cause problems with access at a level we have not seen in the past 50, 60 years. And I think that Democrats definitely saw it coming, but this move and this understanding and push towards bipartisanship in a world where bipartisanship is dead is kind of what became the shackles on this entire situation. And there's advocacy going on the ground. We see that. We see the conversation spreading. We see the voter bus tour going on across the South. But to be honest, unless there is federal legislation, specifically legislation that also removes the filibuster, because that 60 vote threshold is just never going to be met, especially not around any voter rights and anti-voter suppression bills. But in addition to that, we have to ensure that these states, at the state level, Democrats have to just win more seats, because be mindful that the states and the legislatures that are controlling the rights right now of those who are in peril are people who were elected locally. Local elections matter. And at the end of the day, states are making these decisions and they're overriding the will of the people.
You better say it again. Local elections matter, and that's why the midterms matter so much. And you're talking about bipartisanship. Once again, it's bipartisan-esque when it comes to that, because the GOP, they don't want to listen right now. Talking about the bully pulpit, we played this earlier. Chuck Schumer using his, talking about what he had to say about Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and his opposition to this bill. Let's listen to it again.
If senators 60 years ago held that the federal government should never intervene to protect voting rights, this body would have never passed the Voting Rights Act. The Republican leader uses the language and the logic of the Southern senators in the 60s who defended states' rights, and it is an indefensible position for any senator,
All right, so once again, he basically called him Jim Crow, Mr. Jim Crow of 2021. But you know what, Ameshia, you know, it's past name-calling time. You're a Democratic strategist. So if you were in charge of the Democrats right now, what would be your plan moving forward?
There is no special carve-out at this point. That we have to get rid of the filibuster. End of story. That has to be done. There has to be a push to get people out in the midterms. We know that historically speaking, Democrats don't show up in grave number in the midterms, and that historically speaking as well, when you have one party that controls the White House, the Senate, and the House, even though the latter two are a much smaller margins, the opposing party typically wins in the midterms. That's generationally how it has gone. But at this point, if that is to occur, and if Republicans pick up more seats in state houses and state senates across the country, Democrats are basically going to lose all leverage when it comes to the policies that both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris ran on. At this point, Democrats have to stop the negotiation tactics. There is no more negotiation. They have to forcefully make this happen, because the conversations are dead. Republicans didn't even want to bring a floor conversation about voting rights at all. As you said earlier, this wasn't even a vote on whether or not to pass the For the People Act. This was a procedural vote, which is held before any piece of legislation. They don't want to even talk about it, because for them, voting rights for African Americans, for people of color, or younger people is dead, and it should stay that way.
Well, they can't get it done without Manchin and Sinema's help when it comes to pushing that whole legislation through and getting past the filibuster. But I want to hit your point about how sitting presidents, they usually lose seats in the midterm. But because of everything that's happening, because of the platform, because everybody knows they're trying to suppress these votes right now, could that be almost a good thing? Because that is part of the motivation that's needed for some of these people, especially on the Democratic side, to go out there and vote in the midterms, which they usually don't do, as you mentioned before, when you have that sitting president of the party in office.
You make a good point, but one thing we also have to remember is that Americans have short-term memory loss. From here to Election Day, we still have quite a few months until the midterm elections actually happen. Democrats have to be on the trail repeating this message over and over again, in the same way the Republicans are on the trail spreading lies across the country and haven't stopped since before November of 2020. I don't know if the Democratic Party has the wherewithal to deploy people in the places they need to be to create this sustained message over time. Again, speaking to history, we have not seen that happen. Democrats are not necessarily the best when it comes to communication or communication strategy, and I think that it has bit them in the butt more than once. And at this point, it has to be something that they need to tighten up on if there is hope of getting these populations out again for the midterms.
All right, so as a Democratic strategist, one of the best in the business, all hands on deck. What needs to take place today to figure this thing out right now?
Same thing that I feel like Biden is doing with the infrastructure plan. 68% of Americans, almost 70%, want to see these voting rights bills pass. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act, as well as the For the People Act. The issue isn't the voters on the ground. That means red states, blue states, purple states. They support it. Who doesn't support it is the Republicans that are actually elected in the Senate and in the House. And they need to take this conversation to the streets and not just talk to Black people, not just talk to Latino people, talk to others who this is also going to impede. When we talk about restricting mail-in voting, you know who that hurts more than anybody else? Because pre-2020 pandemic, it wasn't Black people who were using it. It was white people in rural areas. Those individuals who don't have polling places in their areas, that is going to, or polling places that are extremely far to get to, it's going to hurt them a lot. And I think that at the end of the day, we need to refine the messaging to make it make sense to those who might not think they're affected, but definitely will be.